We live in a universe of more than 100 million galaxies, within which are countless stars and very likely billions of planets similar to Earth. Can we really be alone there? If we believe the official announcements of NASA or any of the governments of this Earth, so far, mankind has no knowledge of extraterrestrial life forms. But annually, it comes to dozens of sightings of strange flying objects, and even extraterrestrials are to appear regularly on the Earth or in their environment. What is there to the rumors that aliens have long been among us? A Pentagon official breaks his silence, and we now share with you 10 of the most important UFO and alien sightings of all time. The Great Incident of 1952. In the history of Pentagon critics and all the people who claim governments of the world deliberately conceal the existence of UFOs, the Great Incident of 1952 is considered one of the most telling examples of cover-up. In 1952, there was a significant increase in UFO sightings over Washington, D.C. Some eyewitnesses saw luminous discs appear, and shortly thereafter, F-94 jets of the U.S. military were seen in the sky. If the jets got too close to the UFOs, the flying discs mysteriously disappeared. The game was witnessed several times by eyewitnesses, yet officials denied the occurrences over Washington skies. Some critics claim that after the famous UFO crash at Roswell in 1947, the government did not want to further fuel the UFO rumor mill, which was boiling over anyway, and therefore denied the obvious. The Westall Incident. The Westall Incident went down in history as the largest mass sighting of UFOs. In 1966, about 300 students and some staff at a school in Melbourne observed several flying objects silently soaring through the air before landing in a nearby field. The most detailed report came from a science teacher named Andrew. When informed of the UFO event by an excited student, he thought the report was complete nonsense. But when Andrew stepped outside the door, everything changed. In his report, the teacher described the most amazing flying objects he had ever seen. Smoothly polished and strangely shimmering, the discs follow overhead at a speed and manner Andrew had never seen before. For 20 minutes, the teacher tracked the flying saucers, but each time he or students approached the objects, they slowly flew on. The principal had tried to prevent anyone from talking about the incident, even threatening severe punishment. Nevertheless, reports leaked out, and to this day, even NASA lists the incident as one of the unsolved cases of a sighting of unidentified flying objects. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich. The next incident, known in Australia simply as the disappearance, is even more shocking than mere UFO sightings. Australian pilot Frederick Valentich was on a training flight on October 21, 1978, when a strange flying object appeared about 1,000 feet above him. Frederick radioed air traffic control in Melbourne to say that he was being escorted by an aircraft and reported that he was having problems with his engine. ATC responded that there was no aircraft with him, at least none that they could detect. Frederick radioed back to the control center and explained that he was indeed being followed. He could see a large aircraft overhead with 4 bright landing lights. He explained that at first, he thought another pilot was playing a joke on him, but a training flight was not an appropriate time to joke with a pilot. He went on to report that the mystery aircraft was now circling him and had a green light. Radio contact then broke off, and Frederick and his plane were never seen again. All search efforts by sea and air were unsuccessful. There were no signs of a crash. Frederick was simply gone. Frederick's disappearance is still officially listed as an unsolved case. But for UFO experts, it's clear that the pilot and his plane were abducted by a UFO. The Mount Rainier Incident. On June 24, 1947, pilot Kenneth Arnold sighted a whole series of flying saucers while flying over Washington State in the U.S. According to his report, the first flying disc appeared as a bright light on one of its wings. Later, he recognized a whole row of 9 strangely luminous and unusually shaped flying objects approaching Mount Rainier. Against the white snow flats of the mountain, he could see the objects better, and Kenneth further explained that he saw them flying very close to the mountain peaks until they disappeared between 2 peaks after about 3 minutes. Kenneth's report was investigated, but then the pilot faced increasing ridicule and hostility, after which he did not speak about the incident for the rest of his life. The Chicago UFO sighting. One of the most spectacular UFO sightings of modern times occurred at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport on November 7, 2006. Flight 446 was en route to North Carolina when a United Airlines employee, who happened to be on the tarmac, noticed a dark gray metallic flying object over one of the gates. 11 other airport employees and some passengers witnessed a dark flying disc hovering over the gate for about 5 minutes before it suddenly shot upward and disappeared into the sky. The flying disc was not visible on air traffic control radar or military screens. The Federal Aviation Administration later tried to dismiss the sighting as a weather phenomenon and refused to investigate the story. The Valençol Incident. Properly eerie is a UFO sighting from the 1960s that occurred in France. The incident took place in July 1965. Maurice Masse was standing outside his house smoking a cigarette. Suddenly, he saw an object come out of the sky and land on his lavender field. Maurice assumed it was a helicopter and was upset that someone had landed in his field and probably ruined his flowers. As Maurice approached the aircraft, he recognized an oval structure standing on 4 legs. As if that wasn't creepy enough, there were also 2 figures about 6 feet tall standing in front of the strange-looking aircraft, talking in an unintelligible language. Maurice later explained that it sounded more like a humming than a real language. After the strange entities sighted Maurice, one of them took out a pencil-shaped device, pointed it at Maurice, and the lavender farmer fell into a state he described as frozen in time. After Maurice froze, the creatures got into their flying saucer and took off. 20 minutes after Maurice froze, he felt his body thaw, and he could move again. The flying object left a hole on the ground, and a strange liquid. The ground hardened at the spot, and all the flowers around it had died. Soil analysis showed that there were more calcium deposits at the site than elsewhere in the field. Although all evidence indicates that Maurice Masse really experienced this incident was also later dismissed as a figment of his imagination, for reasons that are completely incomprehensible. The Shag Harbor Incident. 20 years after the legendary crash over Roswell in the USA, a very similar incident occurred in Canada. On October 4, 1967, an unidentified object crashed into the water near Shag Harbor, a small town in Nova Scotia. At least 11 eyewitnesses saw an object fall from the sky, accompanied by a whistling sound, and crash into the water. Other witnesses included 2 Air Canada pilots and a ship captain, as well as around 20 fishermen. The 2 pilots described the flying object as a brightly lit, rectangular object with a chain of smaller lights following the object. Shortly after they noticed the aircraft, there was a large but silent explosion near the unidentified flying object, followed by a second explosion about 2 minutes later. The ship's captain, Leo Howard, also saw 4 bright objects in a rectangular formation about 28 kilometers from his ship's window. The called rescue services reportedly found nothing. Even these eyewitnesses were absolutely sure of what they saw. Nevertheless, according to the official reports, they were optical illusions. The Blue Sighting Project. Lieutenant Colonel Richard French traveled to Canada to conduct a study of UFO sightings as part of Project Blue Book. Several UFO sightings had occurred at a fairly deserted location. When French arrived, he witnessed a most strange event himself. About 100 people had gathered on the shores of St. John, and French couldn't believe his eyes when he realized what everyone was looking at. Hovering just above the surface of the water were 2 circular objects, and below one object was a strange life form that appeared to be tinkering with the flying disc, which was about 10 feet wide. When the creature saw the humans, it was quickly pulled inside the flying disc by a second creature, and the object shot away at a speed reminiscent of lightning. French was unable to debunk or explain this sighting, and although even a UFO investigator witnessed it here, this case is also not publicly recognized as a sighting of an extraterrestrial life form. The Air Force disappearance. Now, it gets really spooky again, because on November 23, 1953, near the Canadian border, the United States Air Defense Command noticed a blip on their radar where none should be. over Lake Superior was what looked like an unidentifiable object. Immediately, an F-89C Scorpion was dispatched to investigate the incident. First Lieutenant Felix Monclaw flew the aircraft, while Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson monitored the radar. As the two took to the air, they had difficulty tracking the object as its course kept changing. The Scorpion jet tracked the unidentifiable object for about 30 minutes. When the two jet pilots caught up with the object, both aircraft disappeared from ground control radar screens for a few moments. The unidentified object reappeared on the screens shortly thereafter, then disappeared quickly. There has been no trace of the F-89C Scorpion or its two pilots since the incident. Project Grudge Report. The Project Grudge 13 report is also one of the most frightening and mysterious stories of alien and UFO sightings ever. In March 1996, Sergeant Jonathan P. Lovett and Major William Cunningham were searching for debris from a recent missile launch at the White Sands Missile Test Site near Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. When Major Cunningham heard a scream, his first thought was that a venomous snake had bitten Sergeant Lovett. As he approached the direction from which the scream had come, Major Cunningham reportedly saw that his colleague had been grabbed by two snake-like arms. The arms were wrapped around Sergeant Lovett's legs as they pulled him toward a disc-shaped structure standing about 300 yards away from William. Major Williams stood in speechless horror and watched as his partner was pulled toward the hovering object, and the disc then disappeared into the sky. 3 days later, Sergeant Lovett's body was found, and the autopsy performed concluded that the body had been brutally mauled. Investigation is said to have been detailed in a 600-page report called Project Grudge Report 13. The problem, however, is that no official information exists about this report, and the US government vehemently denies the existence of such a report. What are we really dealing with here? Could it be that these UFO sightings are all bunk and people are so wrong? Or are we being deliberately kept in the dark after all?